A very good morning to everyone. It is my honor to introduce our today's esteemed speaker, Ms. Amy Ganatra. An alumni of the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad and VJTI, Mumbai, Ms. Ganatra is a best-selling author, researcher, and speaker who has devoted her work to bringing the timeless wisdom of India's epics and scriptures to contemporary audience. She is best known for her widely acclaimed Unraveled series, including the books Mahabharata Unraveled and Ramayana Unraveled. What sets her work apart is her commitment to the original Sanskrit sources, presenting the depth, nuances, busting myths about characters like Draupadi, Karna, Ekalavya, and bringing forth insights of these epics with clarity and relevance for the modern reader. In her recent book, Why Are We This Way?, she expands the exploration beyond the epics to the broader landscape of the Hindu Shastras, helping readers understand the philosophical ideas that have shaped Indian civilization and culture. Before dedicating herself fully to this journey, Ms. Ganatra spent over 15 years as a global business strategist and management consultant, working with organizations such as Bain & Company and BASF across multiple continents. Today, she travels widely, delivering lectures, workshops, and courses that connect ancient Indic wisdom with modern life. To engage in this special conversation with Ms. Amy Ganatra, we have Professor Dr. L. Kavita Nair, who is not only the head of the Department of Language, Culture and Society, but also a dedicated scholar, a mythology enthusiast, a strong promoter of the Indian knowledge system, and the brain behind Sahitya 1, 2, and 3. So, dear audience, please join us in giving a warm and enthusiastic welcome to Ms. Amy Ganatra along with Dr. L. Kavita Nair. We are certain that this interaction between these two brains will be both insightful and truly enchanting. Thank you.
A very good morning, dear audience, and everybody who's here to be part of our story, that is the story of LitFest 3.0. Thank you very much for being here, and thank you very much for joining all of us at the Department of Language, Culture and Society. Joining us is Ms. Amy Ganatra, if I'm pronouncing it, yes. So, it's actually a great privilege that we have this opportunity at SRM, that we are able to bring somebody who's done extensive work in Indian, if I can say mythology, but you would like it as itihasas. So a whole gamut of work. I think though the books are, as it was told in the introduction, books are Ramayana Unraveled, Mahabharata Unraveled 1, Mahabharata Unraveled 2, and then the recent one which just got released. Why Are We This Way? it was very interesting that I thought this can be it can give the start to this whole conversation that we are going to have it. So before we get into the question and answer sessions, I just wanted to, sincerely welcome Ms. Ami Ganatra to SRM as well as into this LitFest 3.0. So with the blessings of God, I think let us get into the questioning session. So giving her, as per the introduction given, and I think by now you must be aware that she has been part of the corporate, but then the plunge into the Itihasas came quite recent, and the dedicated work that she has done into this is what the reason for the first question, wherein from a management and consulting background and years of experience across industry and even continents, what led you to the world, from that corporate world into this world of the sustained serious engagement with Itihasa, Sanskrit, yoga, and, if you can call the Indic knowledge systems? Yes.
Namaste, ma'am. Namaste, all of you. Suprabhatam. Is everybody awake? Is everybody awake? Can I get a hey, hi, namaste? Namaskaram, nee eppadi irkai? No answer. Eppadi irkai? I just know the answer to that, which is na nalla irkin. Is that correct? Nalla irkin. Okay, that's the only thing I really know. But very happy to be here. I saw your campus. It's amazing.
Volume is less.
Can't hear?
So let them increase.
Yeah.
Is this okay? The other one. Or maybe you can change this mic.
Hello, hello. Is this better? Okay, then now you have to answer. Nee eppadi irkai? Zor se. Come on. Okay, thank you. I can hear some girls. I can see the guys almost falling off to sleep. Compulsory? Is this a compulsory thing that you've come for? Look, I've been there, right? I've been a student. I've been an engineering student. I've been an MBA student. So I know sometimes it's compulsory. I understand where you're coming from, but hopefully we'll make this a fun session. But you have to engage and you have to keep answering. Then it'll be fun. So the question you asked, ma'am, is that how come from corporate and engineering MBA, how did I come here? So there's a long answer, but I'll give a short answer and I'll narrate a story. So I was working in Hong Kong and for a multinational company, and I got selected for this fast track leadership program. So 20 of us from across the world were sent to Germany, which was our headquarters, to do a leadership training. Now, this was this lovely, beautiful village of Germany, a lovely resort, and we are sitting there. And 3 days training, the trainer was from UK, charging lots of euros, in thousands for 20 of us. At the end of the third day, I go up to the person because I could relate to a lot of things he spoke about, finding your vision, finding your purpose, and lots of things, and the way he explained. So I go up to him and I tell him, sir, a lot of what you seem to be talking about, I can relate to it. We had this person called Arjun, who was a warrior, and we had this another person who we call Bhagwan, and we call him God, but he's Krishna, and he helped Arjun figure out his purpose when Arjun did not fight or couldn't fight, although he had to fight that fight. So this guy looks at me and he's like, you're talking about the Bhagavad Gita. I was like, how do you know? How do you know the Bhagavad Gita? So this man looks at me, a white guy, making money in euros, doing leadership training. He looks at me and says, Ms. Ganatra, I spent 4 years in Rishikesh studying the Gita, the Vedanta, and the Mahabharata. This guy spent 4 years here. And when do we read the Bhagavad Gita? When somebody's dead. Right? That's when we read the Bhagavad Gita. Or if, say, I'm sure if some of these people, students here, start reading the Bhagavad Gita now, if they go home and open the Bhagavad Gita, the parents will be like, "Arey, what are you doing? Kya ho gaya? Hai na? Why do you want to read all this? Sannyas lena hai kya?" All that will start. And there, people are actually making money of the wisdom of our ancestors, the wisdom that has come from this land. So, I mean, along with this, many other things were happening, but then that made me realize that, Baba, there is something we have which actually can give us wisdom for this real life, for things we do, for decisions we make, for navigating the life. What is it? Where is it coming from? And then one thing led to another, and then dhire, I was like, no, I need to understand what does it mean to be a Hindu, what does it mean to be an Indic, especially because when you work with in my team, there were people of 15 different nationalities. And it was amazing that I could connect with a second generation Indian origin American because so many things we did were same. Versus, say, a Korean or a Japanese. And they were very stereotypical in the way they behaved. So we behave the way we do because of our upbringing in a certain way which you're not even aware. Now I'm going to ask all of you, what do you do when say a book falls on the ground or by chance you touch it with your feet? What do you do? क्या करते हो आप? Or none of you have seen it happen. If a book falls on the ground or a paper falls on the ground, what do? You do this. Have you seen anyone else do that? Any non-Indian ever, have you seen them do it?
No.
They're happy to even climb on the books. What is it that makes us that? How is it that we see Devata,
Saraswati.
sacredness, Saraswati even in the book, right? We are not aware. Nobody teaches us this. We just grow up seeing people and we do it. And that is such a distinct aspect of ours. So why is it that way? So a lot of these questions came, which led me to read or study Sanskrit, then explore the epics, then a writing opportunity came my way. And then the new book of mine, Why Are We This Way, actually started in 2013, or rather the idea started in 2013, because when I was exploring, how do I go, where do I go? And if you ask, say, somebody who's a Muslim or a Christian, which is your religious book, they'll say, oh, the Bible or the Quran. What do we say? We know, okay, there is something like Vedas, there is something like Upanishads, some Itihas, some Purans, we'll say. Some will say Bhagavad Gita. But there is no one book. We say we have a library of books. Now, this is the library which has made us what we are. So what is this library? At least get an introduction. So my first blog was on 101 on Hindu Shastras.
Okay.
Now, over time, that has now become a book. But that's how it all started.
So that's how you started your writing.
Yes.
From there. From blogs
there.
onto the books. Yes. So, since you already started the latest book, so let me begin unraveling of Miss Ami Ganatra now. Okay, she has unraveled Mahabharata and Ramayana. Let us unravel her. So, her latest book. In some ways, the title feels like a civilizational question, almost a civilization question, but also a personal one. Why are we this way? So, it was a simple title, but somewhere when I read it, it was like a haunting one. So during my career in Middle East, this was one of the questions that came to me. It hit me very hard. As Miss Ami said that when other people from other countries, when they were there, they're very clear about their things when it comes to a certain kind of behavior in a crowd or when we are in public. But then we had a question. I always had a question that, where should I lean to? What is the reason of doing this? It was like, just because my parents did, I do. Just because my dadi said, I do this. But we do not have a reason, specific reason for that. Despite having this, load of tons of books with all this, hand-holding that could have been done.
Absolutely.
So what made you feel that this was the question that needed to be answered or asked now through the book?
So this was a question which I had, especially when I started working abroad. And that's why I'd written the blog. Now, last year, there was a Kumbh Mela. So I had gone to the Kumbh Mela and I was doing a session on Mahabharata and explaining the difference between Itihas, mythology and all of that, and Ved Upanishad, and they wanted to know more about how to understand Vedas and all of that. So I was explaining, and there was this lady from US, so Indian lady living in Atlanta. She's like, Ami, we really want to know all this, but where do we start? If I pick up a Sanskrit book on Ved, that itself is huge. I don't even know Sanskrit. That doesn't mean that I cannot access this. So why don't you at least introduce something which shows us the entire landscape, tells us what it has, so that at least I know how to proceed. So the idea came from that ma'am last year, and that took me back 12 years. I'm like, yeah, this is how I started. I was confused. I was lost. So I started with that blog, and I'm like, okay, let's see how much more depth can we give it, because by then I had also studied a lot. So that's how it happened, basically.
I think that hello. I think we all must give a big round of applause to the lady who actually asked Miss Ami Ganatra to start writing. Otherwise, I think we wouldn't have been able to unravel this, and the scaffolding that she's doing through her books, actually leading us into the mythology, the Itihasas and Puranas. We've been so used to using this mythology word. So now, from the unraveling of epics, both Mahabharata unraveled and Ramayana unraveled are framed around lesser known facets. I mean, your book is based on that. And what drew you to this mode of writing? If I can call it, it's not retelling, and neither is it fictionalizing, but it is really unraveling, like a kind of unboxing that she's been doing. So the reason for that.
Again, lots of questions which I had, which led me to read. But the unraveling, or rather lesser known facets, is because most of our information about the Mahabharata and Ramayana come from television, teleseries, and from what we think are retellings and people's interpretation of the original Mahabharata and Ramayana. Now for us, we think, okay, it's all valid, it's all fine. And anybody can say anything about Itihas. So before I answer that, let me explain the Itihas, Puran, mythology bit. Mythology by itself is not wrong, or, it doesn't mean false. Mythology means belief system of a group of people, which may be scientifically provable or may not be scientifically provable. It may be true, it may not be true. It could just be legends. In the Indic worldview, we have the category of mythology also. What we call Puranas is what would be mythology. Why? Because these are stories of our gods. And you see, there are lots of different stories. Like if somebody is a Vaishnava, they'll say, oh, Vishnu Puran, Bhagavad Puran is the main book for me. Why? Because Vishnu is over everyone else. Great, it's my belief. A Shaiva might say, no, Shiva is over everyone else, and everything else came from Shiva. And that's perfectly okay, right? That is your belief system. And no problem. We have lived with this all these centuries very peacefully, very happily, no problem. But there is no way to prove one over the other. So it boils down to your belief system, your Shraddha. For me, being a Vaishnava, it is 100% true. For somebody else who's probably a Shakta, it may not be true. But that's okay. We live with the stories. This is what we call mythology. There might be some aspects of history in that. However, Mahabharata and Ramayana are not just Purans. They have been called Itihas. Itihasa. The word Itihas means so it happened. This has happened before. And the definition goes, Purva Vruttam Kathayuktam. Purva Vruttam, something that has happened in the past, narrated to us in the Katha format. So there might be some exaggerations, there might be some legends, there might be some larger than life narratives around it. However, the core story, the core incidents have definitely happened. That is the difference between mythology, as we call Purans, and what we call Itihas. Now, why should we know Itihas for what it is? Because, we all have lots of questions that why did X person take X decision or Y decision? Why did Sri Ram come to kill Ravan? And especially I'm using that because especially in Tamil Nadu, there is this huge thing that Ravan was really not a bad guy, but Ravan was a Dravidian. And because Ravan was a Dravidian, then Aryan Ram came to kill him. Have you guys heard about that? Dravidian Ravan? Have you not? You have? Now, you know what's the most interesting part? Who is the father of Ravan? Do you know? Anybody knows? No, Ravan's father's name is Vishrashrava. Vishrashrava is the son of Pulatstha Rishi. Pulatstha Rishi is the son of Brahmaji, as we say. But by the way, they are all Brahmins. Okay? Unlike what people want to tell you, Ravan is a son of a Brahman. And he's a Brahmin by birth. Now, let's see what Mandodari calls him. Mandodari calls him Arya. Aryaputra. Okay. Now, your people, certain people who want to take you astray and confuse you are saying, no. Ravan is a Dravidian. Not at all. Okay. First of all, the Aryan Dravidian theory itself is bakwas. Absolutely. There is nothing like that. Second, Ravan did not consider himself a Dravidian at all. Because his wife himself is calling him Arya, and he calls Vibhishan. So when Vibhishan is telling him, Arey bhaiya, what you are doing is wrong, give Sita away and all that, Ravan is telling him, you are behaving like an Anarya. Okay, so he doesn't even like what is Anarya, because Anarya is not racial like how Aryan and Dravidian has become. Arya is not a racial term. Arya means gentleman. Arya means somebody who's civilized. Arya means somebody who's good. That is what it means. Over time, when the Westerners came, they were like, oh, look at this knowledge. Because in their head, all knowledge, everything comes from them. Just because they are white skin, everything about them was racial, right? So they were like, how can these Bukhananga, brown, black people have all this knowledge? It has to come from us. That is why the whole theory was concocted. And we are still trying to fight it, and we have assumed it on ourselves that, oh, the Aryans came and defeated us, and we are all different people and we are fighting over it. Serves the politicians, so it works. Also, lots of retellings have confused us about that. Right? So my work was, is it true or is it not? Okay, people have creative liberty, people have freedom of expression and all that, great, right? But at least know the itihas for what it is. Then the answers for why did this happen, who was he, why, what was the need of taking an XYZ decision, all that will be clear. Because we don't read the itihas for them, they are all gone. We read the itihas for us. What would we do in a dharma sankata? What would we do in an ethical dilemma? We are always going through some or the other dilemma, right? How should we behave? This is the learning the itihas is meant to give us, not sit and judge them, but to learn from them what to do and what not to do, so that we live our lives without regret. That's the idea of itihas. And of course, it took me time to understand all this, but then, as I said, the retellings had completely confused me. I gave you an example from Ramayana. There are so many from Mahabharata as well. Like, I don't know if these guys relate to it, but when we were growing up, Kavita ji, if somebody asked, what caused the Mahabharata? What caused the Mahabharata? What would you say? What led to the Mahabharata war? Has anybody heard, or rather has a view on that? Huh? The game of dice, but I mean, that was one of the things. Usually they say Draupadi. Because Draupadi said, Andhe ka putra andha. I think this generation has seen the new Mahabharata, which thankfully doesn't have at least that bakwas. It has much else, but at least that is not there. So they would say, oh, why? Because we have seen in B.R. Chopra Mahabharat, Andhe ka putra andha, Draupadi says, and hence the war happens. So who creates all wars? Women. Okay, war kiske karan hota hai? Because of women. Why? Because no control over tongue, and we love it. No, we say, I know, my mother also no control over tongue. My sister also like that only, love it. So very good, Draupadi is the reason. Now when I was studying, I'm like, okay, if that was the case, why did Duryodhan try to kill Bhim when they were still kids, yeah? When they were youngsters, right? So it is not because of Draupadi that they hate each other, or rather at least Duryodhan hates Bhim. Also, when Duryodhan tried to kill the 5 brothers along with their mother in that Lakshagraha, right? That was before Draupadi came. Then how is Draupadi responsible for the war? Then, when I started reading, I realized this Andhika Putra Andha is not even there in the Mahabharata. It comes from one of these plays where they always take creative liberties, right? There, this person had said, oh, Draupadi said Andhika Putra Andha. Very easy to accept. Because then you can always blame outside.
Easy
right?
target also.
Now the question should have been asked, what led to the war? What was, kya kami thi? What did Duryodhan not have? Did he not have power? Did he not have women? Did he not have Rajya? Did he not have money? What was it? Why did he still want to take away everything that the Pandavas had? Acha, there also the Pandavas said, if it allows us to stay peacefully, you keep Indraprastha. After 13 years of Vanvas, after they have done 13 years of Vanvas, Yudhishthir says, okay, you give us only 5 villages. Let us have those 5 villages so that we can continue to work. You keep Indraprastha. Let's ensure that the family is not destroyed. What does Duryodhan say? Do you know what does Duryodhan say there? Anyone? Yes? Muskan? Yes, he says, I will not even give you a needle's tip worth of land. Because this is not about land at all. Now, a lot of people tell us that the Mahabharata Yuddha was about a property dispute. If it was a property dispute, they should have agreed to it, na? One entire kingdom, huge kingdom for 5 villages. But he says, I will not even give you a tip's worth of land. Why? Because I don't want to live with them. Now, when somebody wants to destroy you and kill you just for being you, just for your existence, if somebody wants to destroy you, what do you do? It is no more about property. It becomes a yuddha, a war for survival. Because you cannot let the bully have his way. Duryodhana is being a bully here, right? Unnecessarily troubling the Pandavas all these years. And in that, he's not even thinking what the repercussion could be. In his jealousy, he led to the destruction of his entire parivar, and not just his parivar, 2 generations of warriors of entire Bharatvarsha got destroyed in that. So, what do we learn from it? It's very easy to say, oh, women ki karan yuddha ho gaya, right? Now, here it is like, am I taking my decisions, any kind of decisions, am I doing something or wanting something out of jealousy, out of anger, out of desire, or do I really want it? Right? When we go through an ethical dilemma, the question should be that, look inwards. Am I being driven by jealousy? Am I being driven by lust? Or this idea that I should have it and I want it, is it really true? These are the questions we should be having with ourselves when we go through such situations, right? Worse is blaming everybody else for what I am. And that's always, victimhood is always easy. Very easy to be victims because we don't have to take ownership of anything. No responsibility, right? And the retellings have actually done that. So you can see, right, how angry I was when I read the original after reading the retellings, because they're like, these guys are misleading us, they're misguiding us. So anyways, that's how it all started.
Thank you, Emmy. Actually, also insisting that how important it is to go to the originals. Yesterday when we had Professor Ruth with us, yesterday evening we had a session, she was also, actually she hinted and she insisted each and every one to always go to the originals and then come back and then have your own, whatever kind of view you want to have of the world. But before going to regionals, when we go to the retellings, that's where we, I think, get misled. So, since you also insist that on, getting back to the originals so that we have much better worldview and the scaffolding will be better. And since your books are not retellings, how much, what is the role that the originals have played in your books? How do you...
So the intention of my books is to bring out the history as Veda Vyasji and Valmiki ji have told us. I am not trying to bring in my imagination and creativity or my interpretations. In fact, I will tell all of you one advice. If someone says, this is my interpretation from Draupadi's point of view, or this is my understanding, or rather they'll say, I'm writing from Draupadi's point of view, I'm writing from Karna's point of view, I'm writing from Ravan's point of view, you should know it is fiction. 100% fiction. It is not even a retelling. Why? Because how do you know this is Ravan's POV? Did Ravan come and tell you? Did Draupadi come and tell you that, oh, this is my point of view? No, this is your point of view. You are imposing it on Draupadi. You are imposing it on Ravan. You are imposing it on whoever, right? Now, chalo, interpretation is possible. One incident can be interpreted in different ways by different people. But if you already have reached a conclusion and you're twisting facts to prove that conclusion, it is not an interpretation. It is just fiction, right? For example, saying that, oh, Andhe ka putra andha is my interpretation is wrong, because Andhe ka putra andha did not happen. It cannot be an interpretation. It is just false. It is just a fiction.
But can it not be looked at as, bringing back the book back to life according to the present circumstance?
Yes.
Yes.
Very much possible. But if you are twisting the facts altogether, then it is not that anymore. That's my whole point. Then you just write what you need to write, right?
Yeah.
And contemporizing it could mean, okay, you're trying to explain mystical elements in a real format. That could be. That is very much possible. Otherwise, just say you are writing fiction. Why try to become Veda Vyas and Valmiki? We don't have any ban on writing creative fiction, right?
Sure.
Please write it. If you want to interpret, for example, if a war has happened, some people will say, oh, it was right. Some people will say, no, wrong. Whatever happened, Pandavas shouldn't have fought. That is an interpretation. But to twist it all together, that no, Pandavas wanted the war and they pushed Duryodhana and they were bad. Now that is not correct, right? That is not interpretation at all. That is just trying to impose your narrative by twisting facts. Like we saw Ravan and Ravan Yuddha, right? You have decided it's a racial Yuddha. And now you try to find Dravidianism in Ramayana, which is not even there. In fact, you twist it. He considers himself an Arya. And you've twisted it. That is not interpretation. That is just fictionalizing it. And it's okay. Please do it. But take ownership of the fact that you have fictionalized it. Take ownership of the fact that you are really not teaching or talking the Mahabharata or Ramayana. You are writing your own story, which you have the right to. That's it.
No, that's how we understand how important it was for you to, return to the textuals, because there have been a lot of retellings.
Yes.
And just coming to the second...
I'll add one more thing, sorry.
Yes.
Because it's very, very important. There's this book called Palace of Illusions, which everybody loves. I loved it till I had read the Mahabharata, right? Why do we like it? Because it has a feminist take of Draupadi. Okay, feminist take. What is the feminist take? Apparently being feminist, matlab you have to hate your husbands and love a third person who calls you a Vaishya and all that. Because if there is one person who has called Draupadi a Vaishya, a Bandhiki, that is Karna. Okay, there is nobody else who has insulted Draupadi the way Karna has. The very fact, the person who says, disrobe her, that is also Karna. Okay, but what has Chitraji done? She had created a love angle. It's almost psychopathic. How do you love a man who hates you so much, right? Who has insulted you in public? That is terrible. But she spoke about that aspect to show how rebellious she is and how pratadit she is, and she's fighting her own people who love her in the epic. Of course, she has created a whole narrative that they don't, right? But in the feminist take, she forgot to add the entire sequence of the Mahabharata where Draupadi is telling Satyabhama of how she ruled Indraprastha. Now, isn't that empowering? A lady is literally becoming the CFO, the Chief Financial Officer of Indraprastha. Satyabhama, I want to talk about the Satyabhama Draupadi dialogue. I say it a lot of times, but I'll say it again, just in case any one of you is not sleeping and hearing. So there is this, when the Pandavas and Draupadi are in Vanvas, when they are in exile, Krishna and Satyabhama come to see her. So Satyabhama and Draupadi are having a discussion, and Satyabhama tells Draupadi, what is it? What is that Vashikaran? What is that mantra you have to control your husbands? Please tell me. Because you have 5 husbands, and I have seen the way they look at you. They are so madly in love with you, all 5 of them. You tell them one thing and all of them are ready to do your bidding. How have you controlled them so much? I have one husband and he is not in my control. So you please tell me this mantra with which I can control them. So Draupadi says, Satya, there is no such mantra. But you are right. My husbands give me a lot of respect and they listen to me. But you know what is the reason for that? I'll tell you the reason. And she explains to Satyabhama the life she lived as the queen of Indraprastha after marriage to Pandavas. And she says, I would wake up before everybody, sleep after everybody, all of that. She says, every day in the royal kitchen, we had 100,000+ people eating, every single day. Now imagine, if there are 100,000+ people eating, you have to manage the entire logistics, right? Procurement, doing the cooking, paying the bills, managing all the helpers who are helping you with. She said, I would do all of that, I would manage all of that, and I would also know whether the helpers have eaten or not eaten. I would also know what work is done, what work is not done. Then she says, the treasury of Indraprastha was vast and profound. We were extremely prosperous and rich. But even the 5 brothers did not know the treasury as I did. I would keep an account of what came, income. I would keep an account of the expenses. I managed the assets. And I did it so well that my husbands trusted me completely. Imagine, here we think of Pandavas as somebody who are misogynist and this and that, and there they are actually letting the wife run the finances of a state. She was like Nirmala Sitharaman of that day, of Indraprastha. This episode, which is actually so empowering for women, this was completely left out.
But it's not discussed also in the open. See, it is just as a
That's
dialogue
the thing.
between 2 of them. So even there, Draupadi is not getting. So I feel in some, the retellings are actually giving voices to the voices which were silent. So they are just bringing out their view. If they were in such a situation, maybe in 2021 they would have reacted like that.
The point is if, right?
If.
So you have assumed Draupadi did not have a voice. Okay. And you want to give her a voice. Baba, just check the Mahabharata whether she had the voice or not. How much difficult is it? My point is only this. If you want to claim a retelling and claim that you are giving some insight from Mahabharata, arey, read the Mahabharata, no? Utna to kar sakte hain. At least read the Mahabharata for what it is. Then give your gyan here. Simple as that. Abhi bhi, let retellings be there. It's good creative writing. It fosters your imagination. Great. But be honest, no? Don't claim to be a researcher on Mahabharata when you've not even read it. Right? Or if you're going to twist it so much, saying that Draupadi did not have a voice where she was actually running the entire kingdom, then you're not even being honest to yourself or your readers. If you're doing it after reading it. So that's where the whole point is.
But in that case, even housewives run the whole house.
Is this,
they have that
okay, ma'am, is this the house? Again, of course
No.
they do. So that I agree.
I mean, it's
given
like
the
a
fact-
stereotype kind of thing. So
No, running the entire... So then Nirmala Sitharaman ji is also not doing anything because the housewife manages the finances. Nirmala Sitharaman ji is managing the country. What's the big deal? Is it the same thing? Here Draupadi is managing the finances of Indraprastha, not the family.
no, as I told, it has come in the dialogue between Satyabhama and Draupadi alone. It is not referred to otherwise.
Where else will it be referred? It is in the Mahabharata.
Mahabharata, yes,
Now if the
true.
fictional writers don't want to refer it, whose problem is it?
Yes, true. Maybe some
So then...
creative abilities,
See, that's the thing. Why are they doing it? Because it doesn't suit their narrative. Simple as that. If they want to show Draupadi as without a voice, oppressed, all that, right? Who has to fight because she doesn't have any power or right, then this, her own dialogue to Satyabhama is very inconvenient.
True.
So keep it out. But then you're being dishonest is all my point, right? I'm not saying don't write. I'm saying be honest. Just claim, no, it is fiction. Why claim it is your interpretation?
Yes, so,
It's as simple as that.
yes. So as long as we see that as fact and fiction kind of...
Absolutely.
Yes.
Fact and fiction.
Fact
Great
and
books.
fiction.
Some of these books are beautiful. I'll give you one more example. Everybody knows Karna? Everybody knows Karna?
Yes, yes.
How many people are Karna fans? Only one. Two. Do people know Mahabharata? Because if you do, then I would have a lot of more hands raised.
Can't hear?
Okay, good. So why do you like Karna? Because he was
Karna.
Charity, okay.
Kindness.
Kindness. Where what kindness? He's calling a lady Veshya.
Yeah.
Did you know that? He is the one who calls Draupadi Veshya.
Yes.
Okay, acha, let me tell you one more thing. We like him because we feel he was mistreated.
Mistreated.
He had so much talent, correct? Despite his talent, he did not get his true respect in the society. Why? Because he was a Sutaputra. Correct? He's a Sutaputra. And we think of Sutas as what? Somebody oppressed. Bicharas. Right? Now let me tell you something. Do you know Abhimanyu? Abhimanyu? Who is Abhimanyu? Arjun's son. Who did he marry? Who was Abhimanyu's wife? Does anybody know? Uttara. Excellent. Somebody said it. Very nice. Uttara is the daughter of the king of Matsya Desh, Virat, and his wife Sudeshna. Now Sudeshna, you know whose sister she is? Sudeshna is the sister of Kichak. Have you heard the name of Kichak?
Yeah.
Okay, so Kichak is the Senapati of Matsya Desh, and he's extremely powerful, so powerful that when he tries to harass Draupadi, even the Raja can't say anything. And when Kichak is killed, Duryodhana is like, it has to be Bhim because nobody has the power to kill Kichak.
Yeah.
That powerful. This Kichak is called Sutaputra. Okay, this Kichak is called Sutaputra. So his wife Sudeshna Sutaputri, no? The Pandavas hate Suta so much that they married the daughter of a Suta. They got their son married to a daughter of the Suta. How does that work, yeah? If you hate a caste so much, why will you marry into it? Simple question, correct? But we don't know because this is never told to us. Now I'll tell you what Sutas. Sutas are not what you think they are. Sutas are mixed jatis. Mixed jati of who? Brahman mother and Kshatriya father. Sutas were warriors, Sutas were kings, Sutas were historians, Kathavachaks. The Mahabharata comes to us from this man called Ugrashrava Sauti. Because Ugrashrava Sauti is a rishi. He goes around narrating. Just as we have Kathavachaks today,
Yes.
he was one of the Kathavachaks then. They were charioteers, but charioteers, आज we think of them as, oh, driver. No, they were not drivers. The life of the warrior depended on the charioteer, right? That is why the charioteers were best friends of the warriors. Why else would Krishna agree to be a charioteer if it was that bad a profession? So it wasn't, they were good people. The father, the foster father of Karna is called Mahayashasvi, Adhirath. Great friends with Dhritarashtra. Now the question you will ask is, or you should ask, if you're listening to me properly and if you know the Mahabharata, why did Dronacharya refuse to teach him? Correct? Dronacharya, we are told that Dronacharya, Karna went to Dronacharya to study, but Dronacharya refused to teach him. Have you heard that? Correct?
Yes, yes.
That is false. Karna is a student of Dronacharya in the Mahabharata. In any version of Vedavyas Mahabharata, Karna is a student of Dronacharya. At one point, because he's so jealous of Arjun. Arjun is like, one of those toppers of the class. Only studying, only doing their thing, not caring about everybody else. So Karna, who's already much older, is jealous of Arjun. And he thinks that if he defeats Arjun, he will become the greatest. So he wanted to learn the Brahmastra. which Dronacharya had not even taught Arjun, by the way. So he wants to learn the Brahmastra and he goes to Dronacharya. Now Dronacharya knows how jealous he is. So Dronacharya says, no, I won't teach you. He says, if you don't teach me, I will find another guru. Dronacharya says, go be my guest. Abhi pakad ke thode na rakhenge. So he says, okay, you go. That's when Karna goes. He himself leaves and goes. None of what I am saying is false. In my book, I have given sources. I have written which chapter, which shloka from the Veda Vyas Mahabharata, whether critical edition or Gita Press edition, to say what I am saying. But inconvenient facts when you want to create a narrative. If you want to create caste oppression, then this doesn't help. So then narratives are created. And narratives are not just, chalo, bad story, interesting story. It's not about that. They create real life impacts, right? Look at Tamil Nadu, the Aryan Dravidian. It is taking people away. It's dividing our own people. How? Through the skewed narratives, right? Through fiction. This is all narrative building for which our own history is used against us. And that is where the problem arises. If that was not a problem, if people read it just to understand it, no problem. But that's not how it is. So, thank you.
So taking, from this little heated thoughts, I thought we'll just take it to the creative side of writing as a skill. Now, yesterday we had Mr. Hari Kumar here, who is a celebrated author, screenwriter, and he's known for his books Daiva and Dakini, and also Naga. So he said something very interesting during the interview yesterday, that every book depends on how readers perceive it, and that every reader's response is unique. At the same time, in one of your responses on LinkedIn, I was going through the responses that you have, to different readers, in that you say that there is no greater joy for an author than finding readers who grasp the work exactly as the author intended it. So in both the writers, I can feel, the way it's perceived or how the books will be received is different. So just wanted to have your views on these two.
No, I fully agree with that, right? People will perceive it in according to their own grasping capacity, sometimes even better than what even is intended, right?
Yes.
So that is 100% true. My point is for the authors. Again, I'm not saying that people should understand it only in the way that I'm saying. I'm not saying that. Okay. Somebody might still say, Arey, this was not fair. If Karna was so dedicated, then probably Dronacharya should have taught him the Brahmastra. Somebody can still say that, even after this incident. I might think he was right. Somebody might think Dronacharya was wrong, right? That is fine. But where is the problem? The problem is, to make Dronacharya look bad, you have not even told that Karna was already the student and it was only for the Brahmastra, right? Now, if somebody is reading the whole story and interpreting it in whatever way they want, that's perfectly okay. And again, I'll say, I am saying this for Itihas, okay? Otherwise, if there is not so much in the Itihas, if there are parts of mythological narratives, if people want to add their stuff, which always happens, by the way, even in the Katha Vachan and stuff, lots of stories which probably are not even there in the Puranas or added to the Kavyas and all that, perfectly okay, no problem. No problem at all, okay. But then, if somebody is asking why this, why that, creating narratives, imposing historicity, then to at least go back to the original. Na? And again, I want to clarify one more thing, because this question usually comes, because I said history and itihas, right? History is written by victors. Correct? We all know that. History is written by victors, and hence, whoever writes the history becomes the hero, and they will villainize the other one who has lost. So people say, so that is why the Pandavas were actually villains. Just because they won, we see them as heroes. The Kauravas were heroes, but because they lost, we call them villains. Because history is written by victors. And it is right. We've seen what colonial history has done, or colonial narratives have done to our history. Very clearly, easy to manipulate, right? If you are in the position of power. 100% accepted. So the question we need to ask is, where do we get Mahabharata and Ramayana from? Okay. The first thing is, the people who narrated it to us were contemporaries. They were only ones who were there at that point, right? One. Second, they are not any kathavachak or court poets who want to basically flatter the king so that they look hero-like, right? Who are they? They are rishis. Who are the rishis who have realized the truth and who will work for the truth? Second. Third, the most important. Let's take the example of Mahabharata. Who composed the Mahabharata? Who composed the Mahabharata? Nobody knows? Come on. Veda Vyas? Who was Veda Vyas ji? Was he a kathavachak? Was he a court poet? Who was he? Does anyone know?
Was he a court
Yes.
poet?
Absolutely. Thank you. I'll tell you what she said. Veda Vyas is the father, the real father of Dhritarashtra, Pandu and Vidur. Right? Because it is through him that these three boys are born. So, Kauravas and Pandavas are his grandchildren. Who can give us the most unbiased narrative of his own grandchildren, if not the grandfather? Now, one might say, one, he is a rishi, so will not be biased. But one might still say, Arey, to kya hua? Grandfather can also be biased. Very much likely, possible, grandfather can only be also be biased. But in whose body is Veda Vyas's blood? The Kauravas are born through Dhritarashtra. Are the Pandavas born through Pandu? No. They are born through Niyog, right? So even if Vedvyas has to be biased, wouldn't he be biased towards his own blood? Isn't that the real understanding, usual understanding? Right? If he had to be biased. So here, the history is not coming from a court poet who wants to flatter, but a person of the family, a patriarch of the family. Even if there is bias, who can be more unbiased than that, right? So in this case, history is not written by victors. And it was actually composed and narrated after the Pandavas had died, not before. After the Pandavas had left. There was no reason for him to suck up to the Pandavas at all.
That gives a very different trajectory to the whole point.
Yes.
So returning to the earlier question, which I said, actually, we have a lot of writers among our BTech students. Many of them have published their books. So the earlier question was from that point of view. So what should the writer keep in mind? Should they write so that their book is taken by the readers as what? Suppose I'm an author, whatever I write, I want them to perceive as I want to. For them to perceive. Or they just leave it to the audience and they just say, write, enjoy the writing.
No, I think, see, whenever we pick up a writing project, there is something we want to convey, right? So that we will always have. Whether people perceive it that way or not is a different thing, right? But you always write with the audience and the objective in mind, always. But the more important thing is, whatever creative output you create, be honest about it.
Yeah.
And put effort and do research. If you've not done research, if you only want to create an imaginative story, perfectly okay. It is a valid form of art. Very, very valid form of art. Just call it that.
Not call as retelling.
Exactly. Don't call it that. And acha, this is not a recent thing. This has happened all the time. A lot of kavyas I'll give you an example. Have people heard of Abhigna and Shakuntalam? One of the greatest plays of Kalidasa, Sanskrit, one of the greatest poetries. He has written about Shakuntala and Dushyant. Okay? It's a love story of Shakuntala and Dushyant forgets and then Shakuntala goes and all that. The character of Shakuntala in Abhigna and Shakuntalam and the character of Shakuntala in the Mahabharata, because Dushyant and Bharat is the son of Shakuntala and Dushyant, right? And it is the successors of Bharat, the story of the successors of Bharat, hence the Mahabharata, right? So he is probably the ancestor of the Pandavas and Kauravas. So this story comes from the Mahabharata. The Abhigna Shakuntalam has significantly changed the character of Shakuntala in that she's meek, she's very,
Delicate,
lot of delicate, love, viraha, all that. A lot of things which she has actually said in the Mahabharata, basically jhadoing Dushyant. Here somebody else has said, because she cannot say those things. She's so much in love. But the Shakuntala of Vedavyasa is not like that. She's feisty. She's going there and giving galis to Dushyant when Dushyant refuses to accept her and stuff. Literally, she says, what is your aukat, man? I come from the lineage of Vishwamitra and Menaka. Who are you? Your family is like a Rai ka dana in front of my mountain-like lineage of mine. All that she says. Eventually she says, Jane do, if you don't accept me, I don't also want to live with a liar like you. I will go away. But remember what you've done to your son. This is the way she's speaking. Like how we would if our husband decides to suddenly forget us, right? That is the bhav, that is the feistiness of Shakuntala, which has been toned down for the lover and the viraha rasa of the kavya. It has happened. But Kalidas is not saying, oh, I am taking an interpretation of the Mahabharata and please understand this from that. He's saying, I'm writing a natya. The natya is for entertainment. The natya is for rasa. Perfectly okay. Not claiming to be Vedavyasa. That is the difference. That honesty, if it is there, great. Let more such creative writing flourish. That's my only point.
So that's actually food for thought, that believe in the pillars of the values, which is honesty. Always be honest to whichever profession or whatever we do, and that will pave your way for the next success. Now, since this is you come to an engineering and technology campus, and our students are growing up with technology and AI, which is shaping absolutely everything that they're doing. So in such case, it's actually overloaded.
Yeah.
So why should they return? Any reason for them to return to the Mahabharata or Ramayana today? Because every scaffolding or hand-holding is being done by AI. They have a problem, ChatGPT solves it. So in this context, how do you look at our generation, and what is advice or a kind of guidance for the students?
See, if they don't create knowledge of their own, AI will make all of them redundant. It is as simple as
Redundant.
that. Right? So I'm not saying specifically for Mahabharata and Ramayana, but any kind of skilling which needs to be done. Specifically for our text, I will go back to the example I started with. This coach. Some of these things ChatGPT will not do because you need personal interaction. You will need people to sit down, listen, discuss, debate, right? ChatGPT can only tell you so much based on what you have told them. Beyond that, it can't see you, it can't feel you. So the personal stuff will always remain. ChatGPT will guide you, but not really tell you exactly what you do, and it will not take responsibility of eventually you doing what you do, right? But what do Mahabharata and Ramayana do? Why are these texts so timeless even today? It is because they help us navigate our own dilemmas in life, like they did. Every single person in the Mahabharata or the Ramayana has gone through some kind of dharma sankats. Some answers are easy, some not. Whether to come here today or go attend a class, whether to miss a credit and go have fun is also a dharma sankat at a lower level, right? Which we are always dealing with. Especially when you start working. You have a family to take care of, you have children to take care of, but you have a profession, career to manage. You might be living in the US, earning a lot, taking care of your family there, but you have old parents back home. What should you do? Should you go back? What do you give up? Because at some point you have to make a trade-off. How do you think about it? That frame, that lens is what the Mahabharata and Ramayana keep teaching us. And they are just the way they are so timeless that even a Gora is learning from it and making money here. Right? So even monetarily it makes sense. One, taking the right decisions. Second, who knows how it might help you actually monetize the skills you have. So knowing yourself, knowing your values, knowing how to navigate dharma is what the epics will teach you like none other.
And that will help you own your narratives that you are going to have. And as I told you that she has, Ganatra has got almost 4 books to her credit, and a few children books for children also have been written. So suppose if a student here opens your book today for the first time, what should they bring with them? Reverence, curiosity,
just curiosity
doubt,
and
openness,
mind. Yes.
And discipline.
Absolutely. Open mind and curiosity. That's it. Read it. You might have questions. note down those questions. Why not? So I do sessions on Mahabharata Ramayana. Muskan has attended some of that. These questions, although I keep the session for 2 hours, I mean there are 7 sessions or 10 sessions courses, there are a lot of our time goes in Q&A. Sometimes the session goes for 5 hours because of Q&A, and a lot of youngsters have those questions. The questions will remain. Don't stop at only questioning.
Yes.
Try to find the answer.
Find the answer.
Also, don't question to dismiss. Arey, what bakwas? No. Maybe some things may not make sense right now. Perfectly okay. Some things might make sense. Doesn't matter. Take what makes sense, leave what doesn't, but keep questioning, and question to learn, not to dismiss. That is important.
Question to learn and not dismiss. On that note, I think, and that is what this LitFest 3.0 wants to do, especially on stories, whether it's retellings, fact, fiction. Everything is based on how you understand, how you want to perceive, and what is your goal, whether to look for the actual or just be on the frills of the readings. So with that note, a big thank you from all of us here for giving us the deep plunge into your realm of writing. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure talking with you. Thank you.
As we come close to this truly enriching conversation, I would like to extend a heartfelt gratitude to Ms. Ami Ganatra for sharing her time, insights, and deep passion for Indian mythology with us today. Her reflections have reminded us that our epics are not merely stories from the past, but living traditions that continue to inspire thought, dialogue, and new interpretations even today. We would also like to extend our sincere thanks to Dr. L. Kavita Nair for guiding this wonderful interaction and for making this session both meaningful and engaging. Now, we would request Ms. Ami Ganatra to sign 2 books for us. We also request the audience to visit the bookstall outside the auditorium to get a glimpse of the wonderful books of Ms. Ami Ganatra.
Before the LitFest began, we had a readathon where almost 120 BTech students, your friends, were part of that reading from mythology. So students had read excerpts from Upanishad and then Mahabharata, Ramayana, from Sangam literature, and then to the modern Greek mythology, and also to the modern retelling. So somewhere, if some justice can be done to the LitFest from the student side, I would expect all the students to start reading, and reading with genuine interest to learn. And all the books of Ami Ganatra are available on Amazon. So please check it out and just see where all of you can, hold on to this rich tradition of ours. Thank you.
Now, I request Dr. L. Kavita Nair to felicitate Ms. Ami Ganatra.
Thank you.